Good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock on the East Coast. Welcome to our National Public Pension Coalition webinar. This is our mid-year webinar. Most states have now wrapped up their legislative sessions for the year, so we thought it would be a good time to update folks on pension happenings happening around the country. Um, my name is Kendal Killian. I'm the Executive Director of the National Public Pension Coalition. We're going to be running through some really exciting materials here today, so thanks for being with us. Whether you're a public employee, a policymaker, an advocate, or a journalist, or a partner in this work, thanks for taking the time. We know how busy this moment is, and we're grateful to each and every one of you that have joined with us in this conversation. Today, we're going to run through a national overview of pension landscape and provide some updates in terms of state legislative work. Today, we're here to take a stock of where things stand at the midpoint of 2025. Across the country, we've seen a lot of pressure and progress on many issues, a lot of political maneuvering when it comes to retirement security. So we're excited to dig in and give you all the details. The agenda today is twofold. First, we're going to walk through what's happened in state legislatures so far this year, what passed, what's been stopped, what's coming next. We'll hear from two fantastic leaders in our states, including the Alaska president of the AFL-CIO, Joelle Hall, and Karen Wick, the program manager for Secure Para in the state of Colorado. Second, we'll look ahead to opportunities and challenges we see for public pensions across the country, for states and all public employees. And then all of these insights are going to be detailed in a white paper we'll be rolling out this week called Navigating the Road Ahead, Threats to Public Pensions. So let's get into it. As I said, first we're going to start with a national overview of what's happened in states across the country. 2025 has been anything but quiet for public pensions. Public employees face a lot of growing uncertainty with federal job cuts, frozen aid from the federal government down to state governments, market volatility fueled by new tariffs. These pressures have made retirement security more fragile for everyone and raised serious concerns, even among current retirees. As you can see from these headlines, there was a period in early April where a number of our public pension funds lost significant dollars. Some of that has been rebounded, but it really shows how volatile these issues are and how ongoing issues around tariffs or oil prices can have an impact on all of our pensions across the country. So now I'd like to take a moment and launch a poll. We're going to ask you, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing public pensions at this point? Kristen, can you do that?
Yes. I am having a few technical difficulties. Maybe we can
Okay, we're
move
going
on
to
to this
keep
one. We'll
moving.
launch the next one.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay. Public pensions are built for resilience. This has been a point reiterated by Michael Trotsky, the chief investment officer in Massachusetts. Brad Lander, the New York City comptroller, said that portfolios are designed to be resilient throughout careful, considered asset class, strategy, and manager and geographic diversification. Pensions themselves are set up for the long term and to absorb these types of fluctuations. We've seen this before. We've seen pensions come back from very difficult times, including the dot-com collapse around the year 2000, the 2008 financial crisis, and subsequent Great Recession, the COVID-19 economic shock. For example, in 2022, the average of the top 100 pensions in the country funding ratio was about 79%. Last year, late in the year, we crossed over 81%, which is considered threshold for a healthy pension fund. So that just really shows how in just 2 short years, we were able to raise the funding ratios nationwide by about 10% coming out of the pandemic. These systems held strong thanks to responsible management and in many cases benefit reductions that workers often agreed to. Pensions are professionally managed. They're broadly diversified, and they're really built to weather difficult times. That's because they're focused on the long term. It's not just about annual dividends or any short-term growth. With a public employee working a 20 or 30-year career, that's the landscape that's needed or the horizon needed in terms of um, how we forecast public pensions. Public pensions are a value for states, for public employees, and for communities. They support economic impact and growth. They are a cost savings for states in terms of employee retention. Defined contribution plans are shown to really have a much shorter employee retention time, which really focuses resources on ongoing training. They provide peace of mind for workers and dignity for retirees. And they really support the recruitment and retention of public employees. And they protect public services which are in jeopardy when we have vacancies in public service jobs.
Kendall, could you share your screen again, please? Thank you.
Yes. Federal layoffs and public workforce cuts will have an ongoing impact on public pensions. The most real threats aren't really coming from market factors. They come from chronic underfunding. That's when governments and elected officials choose to skip payments to their defined benefit pensions, which is really where the chronic underfunding in pensions come from. It doesn't come from the workers, it doesn't come from a lack of investment growth. It comes from when elected officials decide to put less money into pensions. This is what we're here today to talk about because of state forecasts for deficits upcoming, and because of the shortcomings likely coming from the federal government, we may be facing a funding crunch at the state level and local levels in the coming years, which could compete for dollars with our public pensions. The economic climate may feel shaky, but the facts haven't changed. Defined benefit pensions remain the most efficient, fair, and reliable way to fund retirement for government workers. When the contributor base shrinks, taxpayer burden rises, services are strained, and fund solvency is threatened. The contributor base may shrink if public employees lose their jobs and are laid off at the state and federal level, at the state and local level, as they are currently being at the federal level. The federal level cuts were started by the Dodge Committee, if you remember. 26 states have set up mini Dodge committees to potentially emulate the cuts we've seen at the federal level. In response, some states are considering repeating failed ideas from the past, including cutting pensions, cutting pension benefits, or even switching to defined contribution plans like 401ks. Those aren't really fixes. They would make the problem much worse. We also have many opponents considering continuing to push these ideas, like the Reason Foundation and the Americans for Prosperity, billionaire-funded groups that are pushing ideas that could have a very negative impact on our public pensions. Our message to state leaders is public pensions do face challenges, but dismantling them is not the solution. The smart way forward is for sound funding policies, responsible governance, and continued recognition of pensions' long-term value. The economic climate may be shaky, but the facts haven't changed. Defined benefit pensions remain the most efficient, fair, and reliable way to provide retirement security for public employees. These are some of the things we've been seeing at the state level this year and some real successes we want to share. Governor Hobbs in Arizona vetoed 3 bills, Senate Bill 1024, 1025, and 1373, that would have exposed retirement funds to cryptocurrency. Thanks to the Arizona Retirement Security Coalition for keeping things focused on fiscal responsibility. Governor Hobbs said retirement funds are not the place for untested investments in virtual currency. In Arkansas, a bill there will expand the Arkansas teacher retirement system to early childhood educators. So that's we love to see growth when more public workers are included in our defined benefit pensions. That's a step forward for recruiting, retaining, and recognizing educators in pre-K and daycare work. In Connecticut, um, a bill would have excluded overtime for pension calculations. That was stopped. Our coalition there turned out and put pressure on. It really made the difference. Another bill advances to a study which will allow the system to expand access for local police and fire in Connecticut. We did have a loss there, though. There was a bill to expand pension access for para-educators, or also known as ESPs. That did fail, unfortunately, this year. So we're going to keep pushing on that in the future. In New Hampshire, the governor has set aside $33 million in the budget for a fix to the Group 2 retirement inequities. This helps first responders that were left behind by the 2011 pension changes. The governor says it's the right thing to do. In Kansas, Tier 3 was improved, adjusting the dividend structure. It passed the House overwhelmingly, and then now it's being reviewed in the interim. Senate Bill 64 cleans up some technical issues with the IRS and the KPERS laws, but there's always an ongoing threat in Kansas, with Senate Bill 282 being proposed to replace KPERS with a 401k style plan. Now they're calling it CRISP, KRISP. The bill stalled out this year, but we got to keep watching it and stay on guard for any efforts in Kansas to convert their KPERS defined benefit pension into a defined contribution plan. In Kentucky, House Bill 441 allows more reemployment of retired teachers during shortages. The Senate bill will add transparency and fixes for inconsistency in how sick time was calculated in pensions. House Bill 76, which would have improved benefits for hazardous duty workers, unfortunately stalled out. So we'll keep pushing that in the future in Kentucky. And House Bill 1 is always a threat in Kentucky. Ongoing tax cuts could threaten the long-term solvency of our pension funds in Kentucky. In Oklahoma, Senate Bill 1029 was a win. That really how Senate Bill 1029 had an opt-out, and that was defeated, as was a bill to switch teachers to a 401k, and House Bill 1561 and Senate Bill 568, which would have really advanced political interference in the investment of pension dollars. Our advocacy there with the Keep Oklahoma's Promise Coalition really helped to defeat those bills. In Wyoming, there was a good bill passed. The Stop ESG Act was amended after strong coalition testimony, and it died in the Senate. It would have cost the system $1 billion over 3 years, and those dollars would have come from the plan itself and then been less dollars to be spent on retiree benefits. Another bill passed requiring pension investments in Wyoming to focus only on financial factors. It satisfied political pressure while preserving fiduciary responsibility. In Michigan, in 2024, there was a bill passed to expand the pension to correctional officers and conservation officers, bringing them into the hybrid plan that currently is used by the Michigan State Police. This bill was passed in 2024, but currently it's really up in the air in Michigan. It has not been sent to the governor. It was passed late in 2024, but was never sent to the governor by the incoming House. So it's kind of in purgatory at the moment. And, benefits for government workers, those government workers, corrections, and conservation workers in Michigan are now in jeopardy. In Minnesota, there was a real big win for public employees last year with the passage of House File 1889 and Senate File 2884. That will allow teachers who reach the age of 60 with 30 years of service to retire. The bill also provides a cost of living adjustment for firefighters in para, a 3% cost of living increase in 2026 and a 1% ongoing for both police and firefighters. And additionally, state patrol retirees will get an annual 1.25% increase in Minnesota. So a real big increase for teachers who will be able to retire earlier when they reach the age of 60 if they've worked 30 full years, kind of restoring a form of the rule of 90, if you've heard about that in years past, and some COLAs for first responders in Minnesota. Thanks again for being with us. We're going to have some guests joining us um, very soon about and we also have an ability to take questions. So please um, join us with your questions and answers, and we'd be happy to respond to those. Hey, Karen, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Happy to join you guys today.
Karen Wick is the program manager for Secure Para in Colorado. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Secure Para, the organization that I work with, has been around really since 2006, though we probably solidified things a little bit better in 2010, and came out of past pension legislative fights that we had in the state of Colorado to really work on strengthening and reforming the system overall. So since that point in time, Secure Para has been working collaboratively together. We focus heavily on state legislative issues dealing with the pension, but we also work very closely with our pension system, PARA, the Public Employees Retirement Association, to be able to make sure that participants and voices of the retirees and active employees that are counting on PARA are really involved overall. I have been serving as the capacity of the program manager since 2000, from 2020. Prior to that, I was actually part of our program participants and being an employee of the Colorado Education Association. And I see on the list there's some AFSCME folks here. I have a history of working for AFSCME too, so I both wear the blue NEA and the green AFSCME overall. Yeah, that's who I am.
Excellent. And your steering committee there in Secure Para includes AFSCME, AFT, the Colorado State Patrol Association, the Colorado Association of State Executives, the Colorado Education Association affiliated with the NEA, and the Colorado Professional Firefighters affiliated with the IAFF. Anything you could, and Colorado Winds, of course, which is
Colorado Winds. And we also have another association, the Colorado School and Public Employees Retirement Association. They have been around for a while as well too, and are an arm of mostly retired executives and educators, some state employees that might not be active in their association, but still really care about para as well, that are part of our coalition.
one unique thing about Colorado that I think our viewers might be interested in is that in terms of para, you have one plan, whereas
Yeah.
many states have, separate and combined separate plans for teachers and firefighters and other public employees. How does that impact Secure Para?
You know, it's a lot of work in there, but I will say our firefighters do have a separate plan. They're
Okay.
not in para, but everybody else is. So folks that are state employees, school district employees, county and local government employees that are part of para, our education systems like our higher education system. You know, it makes it so we have naturally a larger coalition of partners to be able to work with and coordinate around. There's not as much competition that happens between plans. We collaborate really closely with our firefighters to watch what goes on in their plan, to make sure it's not happening in our plan, even though they're very different plans that have different triggers and different components to it. But it really makes it so that we can have a strong collaboration across hand. And I think it makes para stronger as well too, because we have many more inputs. In some ways, I think it also makes it hard because we have many more outputs. We have individual divisions within our pension system, but it does make it so we can have a more unified approach and discussion and advocacy efforts overall.
Got it. And you endorse candidates both for
Do.
trustees and then elect legislative candidates as well.
We do. You know, one of the things, we have always been organized as a C4 organization. And in doing so, it's in part because we wanted to make sure we were having a very strong legislative presence as well. For a very long time, like many of you in your states, we saw fights coming at us from the legislature overall. As Colorado has really turned more blue, we have less of the fights that are always there. In a negative way, and a lot more the legislative work is how do we keep the system on track? How do we reform it in a pro-participant kind of way? But we also really care about our pension system and Impera itself. And because so many of our board members are elected by the participants, we have those elected for the retiree area, from the school division, the state division, the local and the judicial division. We have really made it ourselves to make sure we're doing that interview, that identification of strong candidates who are really going to take that participant voice in mind.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about some of the legislation you've been working on in Colorado?
Sure. Like, as I said, we haven't seen it's been a while since we've seen some of the more traditional fights of like defunding the system or turning our DB into a DC. A lot more of what we've had is some of the results of reform legislation we passed in 2018 that really identified some different pieces. A few years back, we had a merger of our system. So our school division merged with one school district, one of our largest school district, the Denver School District. Their pension system merged into our state's school system. And in doing so, we've had some legislation every few years that allows for a true up to give some credit to the DPS employer for the fact that they came in better funded. I do see folks from our para system on the line, and so I think we would all say it's sort of sometimes the bane of our existence that this bill ever passed in the first place that allowed for it, because we want to see that employers are continuing to contribute all the time into the system and keep it healthy and strong. But we did have some legislation that happened this year to help with that true up, and it reduced an employer contribution for this one school district. But out of it, we were able to make some other kind of accommodations to make sure it wasn't impacting other participants in a negative way. As I said, our Senate Bill 200 from 2018 has always been one of our bills. That was our big reform bill, and it instituted some different mechanisms overall for keeping our pension on track to full funding. That's always been one of our goals. It was full funding by 2048. And in order to do that, we gave para, our system, the power to, at any time it really looked like we were veering off from that path negatively or positively, to adjust contribution rates. A lot of what we've had, because of the market performance and some of the challenges that are going on, we had a large unfunded liability and we've been chipping away at it. And so a lot of times our contribution rates are always increasing. And we deal with this, we call it the auto adjust provision, so they can automatically adjust some things. Why I bring that up is because one of the consequences with the true up piece that happened with DPS is if an employer is reducing their contribution, everyone is sometimes at risk of the domino effect of them increasing their contributions. So in this bill, we are really grateful for some of the creative math that para was able to do to really figure out a way to kind of put up a little firewall. So that way DPS, the school division, could reduce its contribution while not negatively impacting us. The other one that we had, Colorado is a big ballot initiative state. We have a lot of ballot initiatives that come from voters and from the people. One of the ones that we had this year that passed last November was some additional funding that would go to our police and those on the front lines overall. And we call it Proposition 130. So under Proposition 130, needs to be about 35 million each year that goes to support additional finances and money to our police across the state. Colorado, because we have very strict budget rules. We have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights that passed way, 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 way long ago and has overly complicated our budget. There wasn't really revenue inside our state budget to be able to quickly pay that 35 million. And so the the budget makers and para got together to be able to figure out how to kind of prepay some of the annual contributions that the state is on the hook for in paying to para to deal with our unfunded liability. So back to Senate Bill 200 from 2018. And we dropped a lump sum of 500 million into para to be able to invest, which should we get our annual rate of return, which is 7.25%, that's about 35 million. The state will pay 35 million less into the para, but we'll keep the 35 million that para makes off the 500 million that they jumped in that lump sum. So it definitely is some accounting that we're going to have to be doing and really watching of it overall. But it's another kind of creative mechanism we had to try and make what the voters passed overall while not negatively impacting para, which is sort of always our goal.
Right. And then finally, tell me about Senate Bill 147 that will modify board management, para, and do some other things.
Yeah. So, as we said, with a lot of our focus at Secure Para is both on the legislative, as well as on the pension systems and operations as well. We have been fortunate to, I think, overall have really good management of para, but there were some things that we were wanting to see more of and some greater transparency that had been coming out as of late. And this bill really was an effort to lift up and just provide some of that greater transparency beyond what para was already doing. So some of the things that we did in this bill, and it was really led by one of our partners within the Secure Para Coalition that then we worked with and collaborated overall. One was to say we had been seeing some para board of trustees that were serving for a very long time. And so we thought it was just good government to be able to do some term limits. So under this bill now, even those that are elected by trustees, the only exception is the treasurer who serves by default of their position. They can serve two consecutive 4-year terms. And so 8 years total in a chunk of row. If someone is so much in love with being a pension trustee, they just got to take 4 years off and then they can run again on some ways. But it was really trying to figure out how do we kind of grow some more trustees and involvement overall into the pension. There was also some language that we wanted to be able to say around making sure that agenda and information during meetings were back available online. In the past, para had always had this online. It had slipped. I assumed it was also from some ways probably trying to make room on their website, but really be able to kind of increase transparency, have their agendas ahead of time. Starting in January, there's going to be some more financial documents that we want to be able to see up online, including, I think, some of the struggles that pension participants really have is, what is happening inside the inner workings and the operations? What is the pay? What is the salary? What's the travel schedules that are happening? How are the finances really being managed? In addition to the pot of the money of the corpus is being managed as well too. So we're expecting to see some of that. And then final, it was really around reinforcing that the board of trustees retains their authority over as board members. A lot of times the board will delegate work back to the staff as it should be. They're the experts on so many things, but making sure that that information was coming back to the board as well too, that they had that final fiduciary responsibility on it. And then one more that was in all of it was around sunshine laws and transparency, kind of open records. Para's already been in our open records and in our transparency and sunshine laws. We had really thought that one of the challenge was the way that it was being interpreted because of the category they were under, that board members couldn't really talk to each other in some ways, in a way that felt like it didn't have to happen in an open format. And we thought that was kind of challenging in some aspect because as a new educator coming onto the board, trying to really understand and learn and have a conversation or discuss some of these things, we wanted to be able to have that chance that we could clarify that board members can talk to each other. And so there's just a clarification that now instead of under the state open sunshines, they can act under the local government, which already had the ability that individuals could talk to each other. And so I think in some ways it was really just trying to clarify a few things, provide some more information than what was being provided, and really set the term limits so we can kind of build a greater pipeline of supporters and activists and understanders of who are involved in it overall. And so, you know, we're excited to see this legislation go into effect. Some of these things, once the discussion was started with para around, hey, these are some of the concerns, they were already starting to take it underway. So they were a partner in this legislation throughout. I think there's probably some things they would have liked not to have, or some things they pushed back on that was pulled out of the legislation during negotiations. But I think it's a really good step for figuring that out.
Great. Well, thank you again, Karen, for joining us. Karen Wick, Program Manager with the Secure Para in Colorado. Now we're welcoming in Joelle Hall, the President of the Alaska AFL-CIO. We're going to chat a little bit about the great state of Alaska and our efforts there with the Alaska Public Pension Coalition. Joelle, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's barely afternoon here. My name is Joelle. I'm the president of the Alaska AFL-CIO. Very glad to be with you today. We have the Alaska Public Pension Coalition, as Kendal mentioned. And the partners there are AFT, AFSCME, IAFF, NEA, LIUNA Local 71. And we get, occasional participation from the Alaska State Troopers, which are actually a small AFSCME affiliate. And then we also get participation from the Alaska Police Department Employees Association, which is a separate union without an international affiliation. So they're very helpful in the building, especially with Anchorage lawmakers, and of course the AFL-CIO.
Excellent. And tell us, back in 2005, what happened here? Why did they decide to close the defined benefit pension, and what has been the impact on that on the state?
Our then governor, Frank Murkowski, you might recognize that last name. It's our current U.S. Senator's father. Hitherto, for previously the worst governor we've ever had, now we have the worst governor we've ever had. But Frank Murkowski came out of the Senate and was very open to George Bush's ideas about getting rid of defined benefit pensions. Kind of about that time, they discovered that our actuarial had been, not only had they had an error, they then lied to the state of Alaska about their error and covered it up. So we had some malfeasance and malpractice, and we went from being like 105% funded overnight to being 80% funded. And this was the first time our state had ever confronted anything like that. And there was just, honestly, it's just a huge overreaction. They end up taking the pension away in a year after 3 special sessions and by 1 vote. This was a very, very contentious thing when it happened. And ever since then, we've been trying to right the ship.
And I think it was, if I understand it, tied a little bit to the effort to privatize Social Security, which folks are talking about again now. And so, in 2004, the Bush administration, 2005, failed in their effort to privatize Social Security, but those two things were kind of parallel at the time. The efforts to essentially privatize the defined benefit pension and Social Security. But now, nearly 20 years later, there's been a lot of progress on this. So let's go through the legislative successes in the last couple of years.
Happy to. So we have been hard at it for 20 years. I have been working on this project since I came onto the state fed staff in 2008. So I've been here for nearly the whole ride.
Wow.
And yeah, it has been in the last, I would say, 4 to 6 years, we have been able to center pension reform and educational funding as the centerpiece of both bipartisan coalitions in our House and Senate. Last session, we had a coalition in our Senate, but not in our House. And as a result, we were able to pass this bill through the Senate. That is no small undertaking. Our biggest opponent, the architect of the repeal of the pension system, still serves in the Alaska legislature. He serves in the Senate. So it took, it was a little bit of we had to kind of outmaneuver him a little bit. He is still serving in the Alaska legislature. So this last session, this fresh session, we have a bipartisan coalition in both bodies, both coalitions centered around pension reform and education funding. So we've already passed the Alaska House, and we are sitting in the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee. We got 2 committees of referral, Labor and Commerce and Finance. Now the Labor and Commerce Committee is chaired by Jesse Bjorkman, who is a NEA member and is very eager to help us get this bill passed. He likes a hearing, so we had to really kind of make sure that he wasn't going to hold it and talk about it for a while. So he's made a commitment to move it within 2 weeks of them adjourning in January. And then we get into Senate Finance. And in Alaska, Senate Finance is kind of the tricky spot because the man that I mentioned earlier, the architect of returning of the DC system, serves in Senate Finance. So it is going to take like a Robert's Rules, Mason's kinds of maneuvers to extract this bill from the committee. And we will be waiting to do that. I expect it won't be till the very end, but I expect we will pass both bodies by May of next year.
Wow, that's really exciting. And what would you say to other states if they were at all looking at getting rid of their defined benefit pension? And how has this really impacted public services in Alaska?
Uh, uh, there isn't an aspect of our world that this hasn't impacted. It is most obvious in public education because our teachers also don't get Social Security. So you have public school teachers, and I was speaking about this earlier at a little meeting today. You know, public workers, public employees are in their own marketplace, right? You're a teacher, you're a firefighter, you're a cop. You exist in a marketplace of public employees. Alaska is the least competitive workplace in the entire marketplace of public employees. And you don't have to, I mean, it isn't very long before you wake up one morning and realize, like, wait a minute, I can move someplace that isn't dark all the time, that pays me better, and where I have a pension. And that is virtually any other jurisdiction in this country other than the state of Alaska. So that is true of teachers. That is true of every public employee. We, on a totally like an aside, you know, we just got fined by the federal government for being unable to appropriately do SNAP benefits.
Wow.
And we had to, we can't hire people and keep people to issue SNAP benefits, and we were being fined $12 million by the federal government. Our STIP process, which is transportation process, our governor put in a bunch of political people, and they submitted a STIP that the federal government rejected, and we've lost hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding for construction, like road work. I mean, we're talking the most basic form of, like, you fill out the forms, right? You send it to the federal government, they send you back the money. But there's such a lack of experienced, competent people at these subdivision director levels at the state of Alaska, because there's no penalty for leaving. Why would you stick around for a bad governor? So I guess what I would say to any state looking to do this, you are going to have a catastrophic drop off in the number of people who want your jobs, and people don't stick around through bad governors. Pensions help people stick around and incentivizes people to stick around through bad governors, and it keeps the trains moving on time. But when there's no incentive to stick around, they just leave, and everybody's services, whether you're a kindergartner or a road construction person, you will be impacted.
Yeah, I think I've read that there's been 15% vacancies in state government. And then I understand that Fairbanks doesn't have police patrols between 8 a.m. and noon because they're so short on having officers. And
Yes.
Anchorage even dismissed a number of DUIs and domestic assault charges because they don't have enough prosecutors to
Right.
charge all those crimes. So it really has a direct impact on people's everyday lives.
It sure does. It is, you become a completely undesirable place to work.
Yeah.
And they work elsewhere. There's no reason to stay.
And there's still extensive costs because my understanding is they fly in firefighters from the lower 48, you know, they pay large bonuses, you know, so it just kind of doesn't make sense. Like you have to pay $50,000 bonus to bring in somebody to work. It'd be easier to just have a pension. Well, thanks, Joelle. Thank you so much for joining us. Anything else you want to leave us with?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for your support of the Alaska Public Pension Coalition. We are very grateful for your steadfast attention to our efforts here. The efforts of Kendall and Maria have been really, really helpful. And we're very optimistic about our upcoming session. Just want to thank you very much for your support of Alaska.
Well, thank you, Joelle. Thank you for joining us, and I really appreciate that. But it's all you're the folks doing it, So
Well,
great.
many hands, many hands.
Okay. Thanks again.
Have a nice day, everybody. Bye.
Next, we're going to move through some of the challenges in the road ahead in public pensions. Thanks again to Joelle Hall and to Karen Wick from Colorado for joining us and giving us an overview of the situations in their states. Joelle has really done a tremendous job there in making this an issue across the state and helping to get majorities in the Alaska legislature that support pensions and increased school funding. In terms of navigating the road ahead and threats to public pensions, here's the public pension landscape in 2025. There are 5,000 plus defined benefit pensions in the United States at the state and local level. These are not regulated at the federal level. They're not regulated under ERISA. These are entirely regulated at the state and local level. 27 million people rely on these defined benefit pensions, an extraordinary number of Americans. And this represents $9 trillion in worker-controlled assets. Interestingly, the $9 trillion in worker-controlled assets in public pensions at the state, local, and federal level is the exact same amount that is in every American's combined 401k. At the end of 2024, in the fourth quarter, it's $8.9 trillion in 401k plans. And if you add up there the state and local government DB plans as well as the federal plans, it's the same number, 8.9 trillion. If you add in the private defined benefit plans, many of those being associated with union workers in the building trades, for example, that's another $3.3 billion. So here we sit in 2025, about 45 years into the 401k, and still today, every American's combined 401k totals $8.9 trillion, still the same amount of money that just public employees have in their defined benefit pensions. The emerging threats for public pensions include budget deficits and austerity. We've seen this starting at the federal level this year, the cuts at the federal level, both from Dodge and also potentially coming from House Bill 1, will pass along many cuts to state and local governments in the form of Medicaid funding, K through 12 funding, higher education funding that will cut jobs and really put funding at the state and local level in jeopardy. Political interference is always another risk for public pensions, including making the investment decisions and trying to tie the hands of investment professionals who make the investment decisions in terms of what kind of investment decisions they can make and what firms they can work with. Market volatility and instability is also an ongoing threat for public pensions, considering the tariff situation and the volatile oil markets. If there is major disruptions due to tariffs, that will have a big impact on pension investments. And then privatization and outsourcing is another big threat for public pensions. This has been stated overtly by Dodge that they want to privatize parts of our government, including the U.S. Postal Service. Wells Fargo has even written a memo preparing to try to buy off the United States Postal Service. With 26 mini Dodge committees existing at the state level, we can expect some states to try to implement or copy what they're seeing from the federal level at the state level, and that's why we want to be on guard against privatization and outsourcing. Another form of privatization and outsourcing is school privatization. Vouchers and other efforts that shift dollars from public schools into private schools, including religious schools, shift dollars out of the public sector and into private schools and away from jobs that pay public sector workers and defined benefit pensions. Tomorrow and this week, we'll be releasing a white paper outlining these threats, and please stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar, and thank you again to Karen Wick and Joelle Hall of the Alaska Public Pension Coalition and the Alaska AFL-CIO for joining us. Today we recapped some of the threats upcoming to defined benefit pensions, and we had a number of victories this year at the legislative level, so we're very proud about that. But looking forward, we do see some threats on the horizon, and we want to make sure that our defined benefit pensions stay stable, that no other state repeats the folly of what's happened in Alaska. As you can see, Alaska is already moving towards restoring their defined benefit pension, and the voters and the elected officials in Alaska understand the mistake they made and are working very hard to rectify that. The bill this year in Alaska already passed the House, and as AFL-CIO President Hall said, they're very optimistic about it passing the Senate next year as well. So please go to our website, publicpensions.org, for the National Public Pension Coalition. You can sign up for our daily news clips, and stay tuned for our white paper on public pensions outlining the common threats for defined benefit pensions in the United States. Thanks again, folks.